What does real power look like? A screaming billionaire or a black card? Real power is silence. It is me standing in the shadows, holding the kill switch to a $3 billion empire, smiling as the biggest fool sets his own throne on fire. Want to know how a refused handshake became a corporate death sentence? Sit down. My story is not just revenge, it is surgery without anesthesia. Hello to the amazing audience of Boss Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled monetization on our channel, leaving us without an operating budget to keep things running. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these revenge stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the video description or the pinned comment. My name is Ava Hernandez. It was 5:15 in the morning, and the neon glow of 4 monitors was the only light in my Washington apartment. While the rest of the Capitol was still asleep, I was busy averting a federal disaster for my employer, a defense contractor with the overly pretentious name of Ethirus Apex Dynamics. My coffee had gone ice cold 3 hours ago, but I could not afford to blink. A critical telemetry error had just flared up in our flagship drone program, and if the government auditors caught wind of it, the company stock would be in a free fall by the time the opening bell rang. I patched the code, rerouted the server logs, and buried the glitch before the sun even cleared the horizon. On paper, my official title was Risk Coordination Specialist. It is a wonderfully bland, meaningless corporate label designed to look harmless on an organizational chart. In reality, I was the designated janitor for the catastrophic messes created by men who made 40 times my salary. The executive board treated me like a fire extinguisher behind a glass case. Whenever there was a gala, an award ceremony, or a magazine photo shoot, I was practically invisible. But the second a major federal contract was on the verge of collapsing, or a multi-million-dollar lawsuit was looming, suddenly, I was the only person they wanted in the room. They would drag me into heavily soundproofed boardrooms, sweating through their tailored suits, begging me to find a loophole, a technicality, or a scapegoat. I always delivered. Things had recently gone from bad to unbearable because Ethirus Apex Dynamics had just been acquired by Sterling Vance. Sterling was a freshly minted tech billionaire straight out of Silicon Valley, a man who believed his own press releases and treated reality like a mere suggestion. He was the kind of guy who walked into a room wearing a $2,000 plain gray t-shirt, spewing empty buzzwords about disrupting the aerospace paradigm. He had a reputation for firing employees on a whim because their aura did not match his morning meditation, or because they wore the wrong shade of blue on a Tuesday. He genuinely viewed himself as the ultimate savior of the modern world, a visionary who did not need to understand the laws of physics to build flying machines. The problem was that Ethirus was hemorrhaging money thanks to his chaotic restructuring, and our only lifeline was an upcoming technical inspection at a remote hangar in Nevada. The VIP of the day was Senator Marcus Thorne, a famously ruthless, old-school politician who held the keys to a $3 billion defense contract. That contract was the absolute lifeblood of the company. Without it, Ethirus would be filing for bankruptcy before the end of the fiscal year. Senator Thorne hated tech executives. He hated empty promises. He hated flashy presentations, and he especially hated people who wasted his time. My assignment for the Nevada trip was not to present the technology I had practically built from the ground up. No. My job was strictly shadow operations. Just keep him on script, Ava, the chief operating officer had whispered to me the day before. Make sure our visionary does not blow this $3 billion deal. I was assigned to babysit Sterling Vance. I was told to stand in the background, monitor the live diagnostics, and act as an invisible safety net. I had to ensure that Sterling did not misspeak, did not promise features that violated the laws of thermodynamics, and did not offend the notoriously difficult senator. If Sterling stumbled, I was supposed to quietly feed him the answers through a discreet earpiece. If the machinery malfunctioned, I was supposed to fix it from my tablet before anyone noticed. I was expected to be the silent ghost keeping a $3 billion empire from crashing and burning. Also, a spoiled billionaire could take the credit and smile for the cameras. I packed my bags for Nevada, fully prepared to do my job flawlessly. I had no intention of starting a war, but then again, I did not know just how far Sterling's arrogance would push me. The Nevada desert heat was already pressing against the corrugated metal walls of the hangar by the time we arrived. It was 40 minutes past our scheduled start time. Senator Marcus Thorne was standing in the center of the facility, looking like a monolith of pure, unadulterated judgment. He was flanked by two aides who looked equally unimpressed. When Sterling Vance finally sauntered through the main blast doors, he looked as though he had just stumbled out of a yoga retreat in Malibu, rather than a high-stakes aerospace demonstration. He was wearing an overpriced cotton hoodie, cargo shorts, and sneakers that probably cost more than my first car. He bypassed the security checkpoint, blatantly ignoring the protocols we had spent weeks establishing, and sauntered toward the senator with a grin that screamed amateur hour. The presentation was a slow-motion train wreck. When Senator Thorne asked his first question regarding the proprietary core navigation algorithm, Sterling froze. He blinked, looking around the room as if he expected a teleprompter to drop from the ceiling. He started rambling about synergy, disrupting the industry, and optimizing the user experience. But none of those words had anything to do with the actual physics of flight or the safety constraints of the drone systems. Thorne's expression tightened into a grimace of absolute boredom. The atmosphere in the hangar became suffocating. I could see the sweat beading on the foreheads of our chief engineer and the lead operations manager standing in the shadows. They knew exactly what I knew: we were 3 minutes away from losing $3 billion. I could not let the company go under because of a spoiled billionaire's ego. I stepped out from the periphery, my tablet in hand. I caught Thorne's eye, forcing a smile that was professional and devoid of any subservience. "If I may, Senator," I interrupted, my voice cutting through Sterling's incoherent babble. "The algorithm Mr. Vance is referring to utilizes a recursive pathfinding logic that minimizes latency by 40% during high-velocity maneuvers. We integrated an adaptive mesh network so the drone can maintain a constant handshake with the ground station even in total signal jamming environments." I didn't stop there. I dove into the metrics, the data points, and the reality of the engineering. Thorne's posture shifted. He stopped looking at the exit signs and started looking at me. For the next 10 minutes, I became the focal point of the presentation. I answered every technical inquiry with surgical precision, dissecting the complexity of the machine while Sterling stood there, completely sidelined, shifting his weight from one foot to another like an awkward teenager at a school dance. By the time I finished, the senator was nodding, genuinely satisfied. He looked at the drones, then back at me, with a look of respect he had previously reserved only for his own inner circle. I had saved the contract. I had salvaged our reputation. And in that moment, I made the fatal mistake of forgetting who I was dealing with. I thought that by proving my value, I would earn a shred of professional acknowledgement. As the senator began to pack up his files and the press team started to break down their camera equipment, I saw my opening. I wanted to establish a professional rapport for the final contract negotiations. I walked over to the small cluster where Sterling was awkwardly trying to regain the senator's attention. I stood beside him, maintaining my professional composure, and extended my hand toward Sterling to offer a firm, standard greeting, perhaps a show of team unity to close out the successful demonstration. Sterling didn't even look at the senator. He looked down at my hand as if I had just offered him a dead rat. His lip curled into a sneer of pure, unfiltered disgust. He took a deliberate step backward, creating a physical gulf between us that felt miles wide. He didn't just ignore the gesture. He turned it into a performance. He pivoted toward the cameras, which were still recording, and spoke loud enough for the entire room to hear. His voice dripping with venom. "I do not shake hands with the janitorial staff of this company." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The hangar felt like a vacuum, sucking the air out of the room. The cameras were still rolling, and the senator's aide paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. I didn't flush. I didn't stammer. I simply pulled my hand back, tucked it into the pocket of my blazer, and felt the cold, hard weight of my smartphone resting against my palm. Sterling chuckled, looking around for validation from the board members, his ego completely blind to the fact that he had just signed his own professional death warrant in front of an audience of witnesses. I stepped back into the shadows, watching the man, and for the first time that day, I truly smiled. The echo of his insult hung in the hangar, thick and toxic. Every eye in the room darted between Sterling and me, waiting for the explosion. They expected a flushed face, trembling lips, or a desperate defense. They wanted a reaction to validate his cruelty. I gave them nothing. The heat rising in my chest instantly cooled into something sharp and crystalline. I slowly pulled my hand back, let a faint, serene smile touch my lips, and simply faded back into the sea of gray suits. I became a ghost again, exactly as they wanted. But ghosts are dangerous because you never see them coming. As I watched Sterling awkwardly try to pivot the conversation, I felt a deep, warm sense of comfort. I was anchored by a secret that not a single person in that new leadership team knew. 2 years ago, before Sterling Vance ever looked at our company, the original founders were teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Cash flow was entirely frozen. They could not pay my department, and they certainly could not fund the development of the new navigation protocol. So, I offered them a lifeline. I took a massive pay cut, and in exchange, I legally acquired the intellectual property rights to the raw foundational algorithm. I registered it under a quiet, unassuming holding company I established in Delaware. When Sterling swept in and bought Aetherus Apex Dynamics, his aggressive legal team was so blinded by hardware patents and corporate tax loopholes that they never audited the software licensing registry. They assumed they bought the brain. They only bought the skull. The brain belonged to me. By 8 o'clock the next morning, the petty retaliation began. When I arrived at the Washington headquarters and swiped my ID card at the turnstile, the scanner blinked an angry red. A heavily built security guard quietly escorted me to the Human Resources Department. A junior manager, who could not even meet my eyes, pushed a single sheet of paper across a glass table. Sterling had ordered a complete revocation of my server access. I was officially demoted and reassigned to the physical records archive in the sub-basement. It was a windowless room filled with rotting cardboard boxes. It was his way of putting the janitor back in the closet. "Sign at the bottom to acknowledge the transfer," the manager muttered, squirming in his expensive chair. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice, nor did I threaten to call an employment lawyer. I picked up the pen, signed my name with perfect penmanship, and thanked him for his time. I took the elevator down to the concrete basement. I did not bother unpacking my desk supplies. I simply set my personal, encrypted laptop on top of a stack of old financial ledgers. I connected to an external cellular network, bypassing the company firewall entirely. I opened the command terminal. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I was not launching a cyber attack. I was not a hacker injecting malicious code into their mainframe to destroy their data. I was simply a landlord changing the locks on a tenant who refused to pay rent. I executed a single, beautifully written string of code. The command reached out through the cloud and whispered to the core algorithm embedded in every single server, drone, and workstation at Aetherus. It recognized my digital signature and immediately executed its prime directive. The enterprise license was formally revoked. In less than 3 seconds, the entire advanced navigation system shifted into a permanent locked ownership state. It did not delete a single file. It just wrapped the proprietary software in a cryptographic vault that nobody on Earth could open except me. Every drone they owned instantly reverted to a lifeless hunk of titanium. I watched the confirmation prompt flash green on my screen. The execution was flawless. It was a digital guillotine, falling without a single drop of blood. I closed my laptop and slipped it into my leather tote bag. I walked out of the sub-basement, rode the elevator up to the lobby, and strolled right past the front desk without looking back. The morning air was crisp and refreshing. I walked 3 blocks down the street to a small, independent cafe I had frequented for years. I ordered a large dark roast coffee, paid the barista, and took a seat at a high table facing the window. From my vantage point, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Aetherius headquarters. I took a slow sip of my coffee, crossed my legs, and waited for the invisible shockwave to hit the penthouse floor. The countdown had started, and the tyrant was about to realize his kingdom was built on sand. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning when the executioner's block finally dropped. The live field test was scheduled to take place at the secondary proving grounds, under the blazing desert sun. The setup was elaborate, designed by Sterling to look like a blockbuster movie premiere rather than a military evaluation. A massive high-definition command screen had been erected under a shaded canopy, displaying a dozen different telemetry feeds and tactical maps. Sterling stood at the front of the viewing deck, wearing a smug, practiced smile, holding a microphone as he prepared to narrate the simulated drone strike. Senator Marcus Thorne sat in the front row, his arms crossed, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The countdown commenced over the loudspeakers. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The lead engineer hit the launch execution command. Absolutely nothing happened. There was no roar of engines. There was no graceful vertical liftoff. Instead, a harsh, discordant error buzzer echoed through the PA system. On the massive 20-foot display screen, the intricate tactical maps and real-time video feeds vanished instantly. They were replaced by a blinding solid crimson background, dead center, in massive, bold white letters. A single phrase burned into the retinas of everyone present. License expired. A collective gasp rippled through the audience of executives and military aides. Sterling froze, his microphone hovering uselessly near his mouth. He blinked, staring at the red screen as if it were an optical illusion. He quickly turned to the control desk, his forced smile cracking into a grimace of pure panic. "What is this?" Sterling hissed, covering the microphone with his hand. "Fix the display. You are embarrassing me in front of the Pentagon." "Sir, it is not the display," the lead engineer stammered, his face draining of all color. He was frantically mashing the keyboard, sweat pouring down his temples. "The entire network is down. The drones are completely locked. I am trying to run an administrative override, but the system is rejecting our credentials." "Then hack it," Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. Entirely abandoning his curated Zen persona, he slammed his fist down onto the titanium control console, rattling the monitors. "You are cybersecurity experts. Break into the damn system right now." "We cannot," another technician yelled back, his voice trembling with terror. "The encryption is military grade. It is a closed-loop cryptographic vault. We do not have the primary key. Whoever owns this license just locked us out of our own hardware." While Sterling threw a violent, humiliating temper tantrum in front of the most important client in the world, Senator Thorne did not even look at the red screen. He was looking down at a secure tablet handed to him by his chief of staff. Thorne's intelligence team had not just been monitoring the technical glitch, they had been digging. The chief of staff hit play on an audio file. It was the raw, unfiltered recording from the hangar the previous afternoon, captured by a hot microphone left on the press podium. The audio played crystal clear. The senator listened to my calm, precise explanation of the telemetry system. He then heard the awkward silence, followed by Sterling's sneering, arrogant voice. "I do not shake hands with the janitorial staff of this company." Thorne handed the tablet back to his aide. The temperature around him seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Thorne was a man who had served in the armed forces for 3 decades. He despised flashy venture capitalists, but more than anything, he loathed leaders who took credit for the labor of their subordinates while treating them like dirt. He valued genuine loyalty, unyielding competence, and the quiet professionals who actually kept the gears of the nation turning. Thorne stood up. He did not rush. He took slow, deliberate steps toward the control desk, his presence commanding absolute silence. Even Sterling stopped screaming, turning around with a look of desperate, deer-in-the-headlights terror. Thorne was holding the thick, leather-bound folder containing the drafted $3 billion contract. He did not hand it over. With a swift, aggressive motion, Thorne threw the heavy folder directly into Sterling's chest. The billionaire stumbled backward, barely catching the binder before it clattered to the floor, his eyes wide with shock. "You Silicon Valley parasites are all exactly the same," Thorne growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried across the silent proving grounds. "You buy the hardware, you lease the talent, and you arrogantly believe you own the physics of the universe. My military does not rely on children throwing tantrums when their toys break. We rely on the actual brains behind the machinery." Thorne pointed a weathered, calloused finger directly at Sterling's face. "I saw the security footage from yesterday. I heard the audio. You humiliated the only person in this entire God-forsaken company who actually knows how this technology operates. The woman who saved your pathetic presentation. The woman whose hand you refused to shake." Sterling opened his mouth to formulate an excuse, to spin a narrative, but the words died in his throat. "Listen to me very carefully," Thorne commanded, leaning in so close that Sterling had to press his back against the console. "You have exactly 24 hours to bring her back. You will put her in charge of this entire integration. If that woman is not sitting across from my desk by tomorrow morning with full operational control, I am not just pulling this contract. I will initiate a federal investigation into Icarus for attempting to defraud the United States Department of Defense. Do you understand me?" Thorne did not wait for an answer. He turned on his heel and marched toward his waiting motorcade, his aides following in perfect formation. The moment the senator's black SUV disappeared down the desert road, the fragile facade of Icarus Apex Dynamics shattered into a million pieces. The hangar descended into absolute, unadulterated chaos. Executives who had spent the last 3 months kissing Sterling's feet were suddenly backed into a corner, their survival instincts kicking in. Phones began ringing off the hook. Internal communications channels lit up like a Christmas tree on fire. As the news of the military's ultimatum leaked to the private shareholders, the internal stock valuation of the company plummeted off a cliff. Sterling stood alone at the control desk, clutching the contract draft, completely isolated. The sycophants who usually surrounded him were already walking away, pulling out their phones, screaming at human resources, demanding to know where I was, and realizing with stomach-churning horror that they had handed the keys to their kingdom to the exact person they had thrown into the basement. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, my phone rang. It was not human resources calling to tell me to clean out my desk. It was the executive assistant to the board of directors, her voice shaking, asking if I would be amenable to an off-site meeting. They had booked a private room at the Wellington, an absurdly exclusive, members-only cigar club downtown. It was the kind of place where old men in bespoke suits drank scotch that cost $1,000 a glass and pretended they still ran the world. When I walked through the heavy oak doors, the smell of aged leather and imported tobacco washed over me. The maitre d' escorted me to a secluded room in the back. 4 members of the board of directors were waiting for me. Sterling Vance was conspicuously absent. The chairman, a silver-haired man named Richard, forced a wide, remarkably hollow smile as I took my seat. Next to him was Gregory, the chief financial officer, who looked like he was on the verge of a coronary, despite the aggressive air conditioning in the room. Both men were sweating profusely. The power dynamic in the room was palpable, but it was entirely inverted. They were sitting in wingback chairs, trying to project authority, but their eyes darted around like trapped animals. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Richard began, gesturing to a crystal decanter of red wine on the table. "Can I pour you a glass? It is a 1996 Bordeaux, exceptional vintage." "Just water, thank you," I replied, folding my hands on the mahogany table. "I assume we are not here to discuss my new duties in the basement archives." Gregory let out a nervous chuckle that sounded more like a cough. "Right, let us cut to the chase. The events of this morning were unfortunate, highly unfortunate. Sterling is a passionate leader, but his background is in software startups, not defense contracting. He lacks the refined diplomatic touch required for someone of your caliber. We consider yesterday a minor cultural misunderstanding. A cultural misunderstanding, I repeated, letting the words hang in the heavy air. He called me garbage into a live microphone and locked me in a basement. Which culture exactly is that from? Richard leaned forward, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple with a silk handkerchief. We acknowledge his behavior was entirely out of line. The board has had a very stern conversation with him, but we also have a pressing issue regarding the proprietary navigation software. It seems there is a licensing lock on the system, and Senator Thorne has made some very aggressive demands. Richard slid a sleek, leather-bound folder across the table toward me. "We value you," Richard said, his voice dropping into a register he probably thought was soothing but sounded deeply patronizing. "We always have. We realize your title did not reflect your true contributions. So, the board is prepared to offer you a massive promotion, Chief Strategy Officer, a base salary of $800,000 a year, complete stock options, and a $2 million signing bonus deposited into your account the moment you sign this contract. All we need in return is for you to provide the unlock keys for the drones and smooth things over with the senator tomorrow morning. You get a corner office, a massive pay raise, and we all go back to making history." I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I leaned back in my chair, picked up my glass of ice water, and took a slow sip. The silence stretched on. 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Gregory shifted uncomfortably, his expensive leather chair squeaking loudly in the quiet room. "You think this is a negotiation?" I said softly, setting the glass down. "It is a highly generous offer," Gregory countered, trying to inject a note of stern authority into his wavering voice. "We are giving you a seat at the adult table, but you need to understand the gravity of the situation. You are holding company property hostage. If you refuse to cooperate, we have an entire floor of corporate lawyers who will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. We are offering you a golden bridge. I suggest you walk across it." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator watching its prey walk directly into a trap. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick, heavy, and completely devoid of corporate branding. I dropped it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud, right on top of their pathetic $2 million contract. "I do not need your golden bridge," I said, my voice hardening into ice, "because I already own the river." Richard frowned, glancing at the envelope. "What is this?" "That," I replied, pointing a finger at the manila folder, "is a detailed, heavily documented audit of this entire executive board. It contains bank statements, encrypted emails, and offshore transaction logs. It proves that over the last 3 years, you and Gregory have been overbilling the Department of Defense by 25% on every single hardware shipment. It shows how you funneled the excess capital into 3 separate shell companies in the Cayman Islands to artificially inflate our quarterly earnings right before Sterling bought the company." Gregory's face drained of all color. He looked as if he had just been physically struck. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "I have been cleaning up your messes for a very long time," I continued, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table. "Did you really think I was just organizing files I built the risk coordination system? I see every dollar that moves through Etherius. I know about the tax evasion. I know about the forged safety certificates on the titanium wing struts. And most importantly, I know that if I hand this envelope over to Senator Thorne and the federal authorities, every single man sitting at this table will be looking at a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary." "You cannot do this," Richard whispered, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "You would destroy the company." "I am saving the company from you," I corrected him. "I did not come here today to accept a puppet title. I am not here to be your highly paid shield so you can continue defrauding the United States government. The days of me fixing your catastrophic failures from the shadows are permanently over." I stood up, towering over the terrified men sitting in their expensive chairs. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power does not need to scream. Here are my terms, I stated, my tone leaving absolutely zero room for debate. Sterling Vance is gone. I want him completely removed from the building by 6 o'clock tonight. He will forfeit his shares, resign citing personal reasons, and he will never step foot near a defense contract again. Second, every single member of this board will submit their letters of resignation by midnight. You will walk away with absolutely nothing. No severance packages, no golden parachutes, no press releases praising your visionary leadership. Gregory swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he stared at the manila envelope. And if we agree to this insane extortion, who runs the company? I do, I said simply. I will take the seat as chief executive officer. I will restructure the leadership. I will sign the $3 billion contract with Senator Thorne, and I will actually build the machines this company promised. You have exactly 1 hour to make your decision. If I do not have your resignations in my inbox by 5 o'clock, that folder goes directly to the Department of Justice. I did not wait for them to respond. I turned around and walked out of the heavy oak doors, leaving the arrogant lords of Aetheris suffocating in the ashes of their own empire. The following Monday morning, the corporate world woke up to a carefully sanitized, heavily legally reviewed press release. Sterling Vance had permanently stepped down from his role, citing sudden, unforeseen health reasons. He evaporated from the industry without a farewell email, without a severance package, and without a golden parachute. The entire corrupt board of directors followed him out the door before the weekend was even over, disappearing into the shadows they so rightfully belonged in. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked through the main glass doors of the Washington headquarters. I was no longer the invisible risk coordinator scurrying through the back hallways to fix other people's disasters. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, my head held high, and the security guards practically tripped over themselves to badge me through the executive turnstiles. I was officially the interim chief executive officer of Aetheris Apex Dynamics, backed by the full, terrifying authority of Senator Marcus Thorne and the United States Department of Defense. My first executive order was architectural in nature. Sterling had built himself a massive, soundproof glass corner office on the top floor, specifically designed to look down on the rest of the workforce like an emperor observing his peasants. I had hired a demolition crew over the weekend to smash every single pane of that glass. When the senior staff arrived that morning, the fortress of ego was completely gone, replaced by a massive, open-concept strategy table. My second order was personnel. By 10 o'clock, Human Resources had formally terminated the employment of every middle manager and sycophant director who had enabled Sterling's toxic reign and laughed at his cruel jokes. At noon, I called a mandatory all-hands meeting in the main auditorium. Hundreds of employees filed in, buzzing with nervous energy, exchanging anxious glances and whispered rumors about the sudden boardroom massacre. When I stepped onto the stage, I did not bring a slideshow filled with corporate buzzwords about synergy, paradigm shifts, or disruptive vision. I walked to the podium and stood in complete silence until the massive room grew so intensely quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, I gave a subtle nod to the audio-visual team. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. I did not show them a quarterly earnings report. I played the raw, unedited footage from the Nevada hangar. The entire company watched as I saved the presentation, stepped forward, and politely extended my hand. Then, the speakers amplified Sterling's sneering, arrogant voice echoing across the auditorium. I do not shake hands with the janitorial staff of this company. The video faded to pitch black. The hundreds of engineers, developers, and analysts stared at me in stunned, horrified silence. Many of them had their mouths open in pure shock. I stepped up to the microphone, allowing a sharp, cold, and utterly confident smile to touch my face. That era of Aetheris Apex Dynamics is officially over, I announced, my voice ringing out clear, steady, and echoing with absolute authority. Starting today, this company operates under a new, unbreakable fundamental rule. Your position in this building will be determined entirely by your competence, your hard work, and your integrity. Inflated egos, disrespect, and incompetence will no longer be tolerated, hidden, or subsidized. If you are here to build the future and do the actual work, you have a permanent place at my table. If you are here to serve your own vanity, the exits are clearly marked, and I suggest you use them now. Nobody moved a muscle. They just looked at me with a newfound, profound sense of respect. Later that afternoon, the chaotic dust of the transition had finally settled. I stood alone in the newly opened executive suite, looking out the panoramic window at the sprawling, majestic skyline of the nation's capital. The late afternoon sun painted the monuments in a brilliant, fiery gold. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of a dark, rich espresso. Resting on the polished mahogany table beside me was a pristine, legally binding $3 billion defense contract, fully signed, sealed, and secured. It was the absolute, undeniable proof of a simple truth. When you are pushed into a dark corner by arrogant, powerful men, you should never cry. You should just quietly, methodically, and ruthlessly take the throne of the man who pushed you. Thank you so much, our wonderful listeners, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. We would love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from today? Please leave a comment and let us know. If you found today's story satisfying and want to help us keep this channel alive, we humbly ask for your support. A donation of just $1 makes a massive difference. It allows us to pay our dedicated team, helps them support their families during these tough times, and ensures we can keep creating these high-quality revenge stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the link in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you for your incredible support, and we will see you in the next story.